In the opulent world of 1920s, London fashion, a deadly secret unravels. Madame Eloise Varenne, a celebrated designer, is found poisoned in her atelier, a shattered teacup and torn velvet curtain hinting at a struggle that never was. Hercule Poirot, with his razor-sharp mind, untangles a web of motives, a model fearing obscurity, a rival burning with ambition, and an investor teetering on ruin. As velvet threads and hidden debts point to a cunning killer, only Poirot can unveil the truth behind the velvet shadow, a murder woven with deception, where elegance hides a deadly heart. Chapter 1. The Atelier of Death. The late morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Madame Eloise Varenne's atelier, casting golden beams across bolts of silk and satin that lined the walls like a painter's palette. The air, usually vibrant with the hum of sewing machines and the soft chatter of seamstresses, hung heavy with an unnatural stillness. Hercule Poirot, whose patent leather shoes clicking softly on the polished oak floor, stepped into the room with the precision of a man who never misjudged a step. His small, fastidious frame seemed almost incongruous amid the grandeur of the fashion house. Yet his keen eyes, sharp as a tailor's shears, missed nothing. At the far end of the atelier, near a grand mahogany desk cluttered with sketches and swatches, lay the body of Madame Eloise Varenne. Her once elegant form was slumped forward, her silver hair spilling over a velvet runner, now stained with the remnants of a spilled teacup. The delicate porcelain lay in shards, its contents seeping into the fabric, leaving a dark, accusing blot. A heavy velvet curtain, its rich burgundy folds catching the light, hung askew by the window, its lower edge torn in a jagged, violent slash. The scene was both tragic and theatrical, as if staged for some grim tableau. Inspector Japp, his broad face etched with fatigue, stood by the desk, his notebook open but idle. "Poirot," he said, his voice gruff with the weight of another perplexing case, "you've a knack for turning up when things get messy. Cyanide, the doctor says, in her tea, no less. And that curtain looks like someone put up a fight. But who'd want to kill a woman who makes frocks for duchesses?" His tone carried the exasperation of a man who preferred his crimes straightforward. Poirot tilted his head, his moustache twitching slightly as he surveyed the room. "Mon ami," he replied, his voice smooth as the silk on the walls, "a dressmaker such as Madame Varenne does not merely create frocks. She weaves dreams, desires, and parfois rivalries. In such a world, passion and envy are never far from the surface." He approached the desk, his gloved fingers hovering over the shattered teacup without touching it. The faint, bitter scent of almonds lingered, confirming Japp's report of cyanide. His gaze drifted to the torn curtain, its frayed edge dangling like a question's mark. "Tell me, Inspector," Poirot said, turning to Japp, "who was present in this atelier when Madame met her end?" Japp flipped through his notebook. "The assistant, Sophie Martin, found her about an hour ago, around 10 o'clock. Says she came in to deliver the morning's tea, and saw Madame slumped over. No one else was here. But we've got 3 possibles who were in the building. Clara Duval, the model, André Leclerc, some rival designer, and Reginald Hawthorne, an investor type. All claim they were elsewhere, of course." Poirot's eyes gleamed with that familiar spark, the first stirring of his little grey cells. "Of course," he echoed softly, almost to himself. He stepped toward the curtain, examining the tear with care. The fabric was thick, luxurious, not easily rent by accident. The tear was deliberate, he noted, its edges too purposeful for a mere struggle. Curious, he murmured, his fingers brushing the velvet lightly. This tear, it is not what it seems. It speaks, Inspector, but its message is not yet clear. Japp snorted, though his respect for Poirot tempered his skepticism. You and your messages, Poirot. I say we start with the suspects and see who's lying. Poirot smiled, a small, enigmatic curve of his lips. Patience, mon ami. The truth, like a fine gown, must be tailored carefully. Let us first understand the scene, for it is here, in this atelier of death, that the killer has left their signature. He turned back to the desk, noting the scattered sketches, elegant gowns, each a testament to Eloise's genius. A small silver teapot sat on a tray, its lid slightly ajar, alongside a sugar bowl and a tiny pitcher of cream. A single velvet thread, barely noticeable, clung to the desk's carved edge, its hue matching the torn curtain. Poirot's brow furrowed. "The tea," he said. "Who prepared it?" Japp called over Sophie, a slight young woman with nervous eyes, who hovered near the doorway. "I did, sir," she stammered. "I always brew Madame's tea at 9. I left it on the desk and went to sort the fabrics." "And anyone might have approached this desk?" Poirot asked, his tone gentle but probing. Sophie nodded, twisting her apron. "Yes, sir. The atelier was busy this morning. Models, delivery boys, Monsieur Hawthorne, all were in and out." Poirot's gaze returned to the thread, then to the curtain. "Merci, mademoiselle," he said, dismissing her. To Japp, he added, "The poison, the curtain, the thread. They are threads of a tapestry, Inspector. We must weave them together to see the pattern." As Japp began organizing his men to question the staff, Poirot stood motionless, his eyes sweeping the room. The atelier, with its opulent fabrics and delicate tools, was a stage for beauty. But now it concealed a darker drama. Somewhere among the silks and shadows lay the truth. And Hercule Poirot, with his unerring instinct, would find it. Chapter 2. The Cast of Motives Hercule. Poirot stood in the showroom of Madame Eloise Varenne's atelier, a cavernous space where mirrors reflected the elegance of her creations, now dimmed by the shadow of her death. The room, with its crystal chandeliers and plush burgundy carpets, was a shrine to haute couture, but today it served as a stage for suspicion. The three principal suspects, Mademoiselle Clara Duval, Monsieur André Leclerc, and Mr. Reginald Hawthorne, had been summoned, and they sat in uneasy silence, their postures betraying the weight of scrutiny. Inspector Japp, standing by a rack of shimmering gowns, muttered to Poirot, "They're a mixed lot, aren't they? A model, a designer, an investor, each with a reason to want Eloise out of the way, if you ask me." Poirot's green eyes, sharp as cut emeralds, surveyed the trio. "Indeed, mon ami," he replied softly, "but motives, like threads, must be examined closely to see which holds the truth." The showroom's air was thick with tension, the faint scent of Eloise's signature perfume lingering like a ghost. Poirot adjusted his immaculate tie, his movements deliberate, and stepped forward, his small stature commanding the room. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice carrying the precise cadence of a man accustomed to unraveling secrets. "The tragedy of Madame Varenne's death has brought us together. Each of you was near her atelier this morning, and each, I suspect, holds a piece of the puzzle. I, Hercule Poirot, will discover how these pieces fit." His gaze swept over them, noting every flicker of expression, every nervous gesture. Clara Duval sat nearest the window, her willowy frame draped in a simple black dress that accentuated her porcelain beauty. Her golden hair, swept into an elegant chignon, framed a face that could have graced any of Eloise's catwalks, yet her blue eyes were rimmed with red, as if she had wept. She clutched a silk handkerchief, twisting it in her slender fingers. Poirot observed the delicate tremor in her hands, a detail that spoke of grief, or perhaps something more. "Mademoiselle Duval," he said, his tone gentle yet probing, "you were Madame Varenne's star model, n'est-ce pas? A muse for her creations. Tell me, where were you when she met her untimely end?" Clara's lips parted, then closed, as if weighing her words. "I was in the fitting room, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice soft but steady, with a faint French lilt. "It was just past 9, I think. I was trying on gowns for the spring collection. Madame was very particular about the fit." She paused, her eyes dropping to the handkerchief. I heard nothing, saw nothing, until Sophie screamed. Poirot noted the precision of her response, as if rehearsed, and the absence of any witness to confirm her solitude. "Alone, mademoiselle?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "In a busy atelier. No one saw you?" Clara's cheeks flushed faintly. It was early. The others were in the workroom or with clients. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And your relationship with Madame Varenne? It was, shall we say, harmonious?" Clara's fingers tightened on the handkerchief, a fleeting gesture. "She was demanding," she admitted, "but she made me a star. I owed her everything." Yet her voice held a tremor, a note of something unspoken. Poirot's little grey cells stirred. Clara's beauty was a mask, he thought. But what lay beneath? Envy, perhaps, or fear of losing her place in Eloise's glittering world. He made a mental note to probe further, for a model's career, like a rose, could wilt swiftly. He turned next to André Leclerc, who lounged in a velvet-upholstered chair, with the air of a man who found the proceedings tiresome. His dark hair was slicked back, and his tailored suit, though elegant, bore the bold cut of his own avant-garde designs. His eyes, sharp and mocking, met Poirot's without flinching. "Monsieur Leclerc, you are a designer of some renown," Poirot said, his tone laced with faint irony. "Yet you and Madame Varenne were not, I understand, the best of friends." André's lips curled into a smirk. "Eloise thought her classic frills were the pinnacle of fashion," he said, his French accent thick with disdain. "She called my work vulgar, an insult to her precious tradition. We argued, yes, but murder? Absurd." Poirot's moustache twitched. "An argument, you say? When did this occur?" André shrugged, a gesture of calculated nonchalance. "Yesterday afternoon, in her office. She accused me of copying her designs. Me, André Leclerc. I told her she was a relic, clinging to the past." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "But I was at my studio this morning, sketching. My assistant can confirm it. Well, when she returns from her errands." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The absence of the assistant was convenient. Too convenient. And André's bravado, he suspected, masked a deeper wound. Rivalry in the world of fashion was a sharp blade, and Eloise's influence could have cut André's ambitions to ribbons. Finally, Poirot's gaze settled on Reginald Hawthorne, a man whose broad shoulders seemed to sag under an invisible burden. His grey suit, though expensive, was rumpled, and his hands fidgeted with a gold watch chain, betraying a nervous energy. His face, lined and weary, suggested a man in his late 50s, though his eyes darted with the alertness of one accustomed to high stakes. "Monsieur Hawthorne," Poirot said, his voice smooth as velvet, "you invested heavily in Madame Varenne's fashion house. Oui, a man of business, yet you were here this morning, in the atelier. Why?" Hawthorne cleared his throat, his fingers tightening on the watch chain. "I had an appointment with Eloise," he said, his voice clipped with a trace of a northern accent. "We were to discuss the finances for her spring collection. I was in her office, briefly, then left for my own, across town." Poirot tilted his head. "And this discussion, it was amicable?" Hawthorne hesitated, a bead of sweat glistening at his temple. "Eloise was difficult," he admitted. "The collection was over budget, and I urged caution. But I left her alive, Monsieur Poirot. I swear it." His protestation, Poirot noted, was fervent, but his alibi, like the others, hung on the slender thread of his word alone. Poirot paced slowly before the trio, his polished shoes silent on the carpet. "A curious affair," he mused aloud, his hands clasped behind his back. "Madame Varenne, a woman of genius, is poisoned in her own atelier, her tea laced with cyanide. A velvet curtain is torn, suggesting a struggle, yet the scene is too orderly, too composed. And you, mes amis, each have a motive, yet each claim innocence." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Clara's eyes remained fixed on her handkerchief. André's smirk faltered slightly, and Hawthorne's fingers stilled on his watch chain. Japp, watching from the sidelines, shifted impatiently. "Come now, Poirot," he muttered. "Let's get them to the station and sort this out." Poirot raised a hand, silencing Japp. "Non, Inspector. The truth is not found in haste. It is here, in this room, among these faces, that we will uncover the killer." He turned to Sophie Martin, the assistant, who hovered nervously by a display of Eloise's latest gowns. Her plain cotton dress and mousy brown hair made her nearly invisible amidst the atelier's splendor, yet her eyes held a quiet fear. "Mademoiselle Martin," Poirot said kindly, "you were the first to find Madame Varenne. Tell me, what did you see when you entered the atelier?" Sophie's hands twisted in her apron, her voice barely above a whisper. "I brought the tea at 9, as always, and left it on her desk. Madame was sketching, muttering about the new collection. I went to the workroom to sort fabrics. When I returned, just before 10, she was gone. The teacup was broken, the curtain torn. I screamed for help." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing her words. "And you saw no one else near the desk?" Sophie shook her head. "It was busy, people coming and going. I didn't notice anyone in particular." Poirot's gaze returned to the suspects. "A busy atelier," he said, "yet no one sees the fatal act. The poison, it is swift, but it requires opportunity. The curtain, it is torn, but why? To mislead, perhaps, or to conceal." He addressed the trio once more. "Each of you was near this morning. Each of you had reason to wish Madame harm. Mademoiselle Duval, your stardom depended on her favor, and favor can fade. Monsieur Leclerc, your rivalry with her was a fire that burned brightly. Monsieur Hawthorne, your fortune rested on her success, and failure is a heavy burden." His voice softened, but his eyes were relentless. "One of you has woven a lie, and I, Hercule Poirot, will unravel it." Clara's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with sudden defiance. "I loved Eloise," she said, her voice breaking. "She was like a mother to me. I would never harm her." André scoffed, crossing his arms. Sentimentality, Clara. You knew she was planning to replace you with that new girl, Elise. Your career was on the line. Clara's face paled, but she said nothing. Hawthorne, meanwhile, mopped his brow with a handkerchief. "This is nonsense," he muttered. "I'm a businessman, not a murderer. Eloise's death ruins me as much as anyone." Poirot observed the exchange, his mind racing. Clara's passion, André's scorn, Hawthorne's desperation, each was a thread in the tapestry of this crime. He noted the way Clara's fingers had stilled, her earlier tremor replaced by a steely resolve. André's bravado, he suspected, hid a deeper insecurity, perhaps a fear of being overshadowed by Eloise's legacy. And Hawthorne's agitation suggested a man on the brink, his financial empire teetering. But which of them, Poirot wondered, had the cunning to slip cyanide into a teacup and tear a curtain to deceive? He approached a mannequin draped in one of Eloise's gowns, its velvet bodice catching the light. A single thread, burgundy and fine, clung to the fabric, unnoticed by the police. Poirot plucked it carefully, holding it to the light. It matched the curtain, he was certain, but its presence here, far from the desk, was puzzling. "The velvet," he murmured. "It speaks, but its language is subtle." He slipped the thread into his pocket, his mind turning to the torn curtain. Was it a deliberate act, meant to suggest a struggle, or something else entirely? The answer, he knew, lay in the motives of those before him. Japp, growing restless, approached Poirot. "What now, Poirot? We've got statements, but no hard evidence. Shall we search their homes, their offices?" Poirot shook his head. "No, Inspector. The evidence is here, in the atelier, in the words and silences of these three. We must listen, observe, and think. The killer has left a trail, however faint, and Hercule Poirot will follow it." He turned back to the suspects, his voice firm. "You may go, for now, but know this. The truth cannot hide forever. I will see you again." As the trio dispersed, Clara with a hurried step, André with a swagger, Hawthorne with a slump, Poirot lingered in the showroom. The mirrors reflected his small figure, but his mind was vast, weaving together the fragments of the morning's tragedy. The cyanide, the curtain, the thread, they were clues, yes, but also distractions. The killer, he sensed, had crafted a performance, and he would need all his ingenuity to see through the act. With a final glance at the velvet-draped mannequin, Poirot stepped into the fading light, his little grey cells already at work. Chapter 3. The Poisoned Cup. Hercule Poirot stood once more in Nier, the atelier of Madame Eloise Varenne, where the air seemed to hold its breath, as if reluctant to disturb the scene of her demise. The morning's chaos had settled into a sombre hush, with only the faint ticking of a gilt clock on the wall breaking the silence. The atelier, with its high ceilings and racks of exquisite fabrics, was a temple to beauty. But now it bore the stain of murder. Poirot's sharp eyes roamed the room, settling on the mahogany desk where Eloise had met her end. The shattered teacup, its porcelain fragments glinting like broken promises, lay scattered across the velvet runner, now marred by a dark, irregular stain. The silver teapot, its lid still ajar, stood sentinel on its tray, flanked by a sugar bowl and a small pitcher of cream. Nearby, the heavy burgundy curtain hung with its jagged tear, a silent witness to the morning's tragedy. Inspector Japp, his hat pushed back on his forehead, stood by the window, his broad frame casting a shadow across the floor. "It's a devilish business, Poirot," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. Cyanide in the tea, quick and deadly. But who slipped it in? That's the rub. The place was buzzing with people. Models, seamstresses, that investor fellow. Anyone could have done it. Poirot, his hands clasped behind his back, gave a slight nod. Précisément, mon ami. The opportunity was plentiful. But the method, that requires precision and nerve. Let us examine the stage of this crime, for it is here that the killer has left their mark. He approached the desk with the measured steps of a man who revered order, his gloved fingers hovering over the teacup's remnants without touching them. The faint, acrid scent of almonds lingered, a grim confirmation of cyanide's presence. Poirot's gaze narrowed as he studied the fragments, noting their uneven edges, as if the cup had been knocked from Eloise's hand in her final moments. "The cup," he murmured. "It tells a story, but not the one it appears to tell." He turned to the teapot, lifting its lid with a handkerchief to peer inside. The tea leaves, dark and sodden, offered no immediate secrets, but Poirot's mind was already weaving possibilities. "Who prepared this tea, Inspector?" he asked, his voice calm but insistent. Japp gestured toward Sophie Martin, who lingered near the doorway, her plain face pale and her hands twisting in her apron. "Sophie here says she brewed it," Japp replied. "Same as every morning, she claims." Poirot beckoned the young woman forward, his demeanor gentle to ease her obvious unease. "Mademoiselle Martin," he said, his accent lending a soothing cadence. "Describe to me, if you please, the routine of Madame Varenne's tea." Sophie swallowed, her eyes darting to the desk. I always made it at 9, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Madame liked her dazzling, steeped for exactly 4 minutes. I used the silver. Teapot, added a teaspoon of sugar. She never took cream, and left it on her desk. She was sketching when I brought it in, and she waved me away, said she was busy." Sophie's fingers tightened on her apron. "I went to the workroom after that, to sort the new silks. I didn't come back until I found her." Poirot's eyes softened, but his mind was razor-sharp. "And this tea, mademoiselle, it was left unattended." Sophie nodded, her cheeks flushing. "Yes, sir. The atelier was busy. Clara was in the fitting room. Monsieur Hawthorne came to see Madame, and there were delivery boys with fabric samples. I didn't watch the tray after I set it down." Poirot's moustache twitched slightly. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful." As Sophie retreated, Poirot turned back to the desk, his gaze falling on a single burgundy thread caught on the desk's carved edge. It matched the torn curtain precisely, a detail the police had overlooked. He plucked it carefully with his handkerchief, holding it to the light. "Curieux," he whispered. "The curtain and the thread, they are connected. But how?" Japp, watching Poirot's meticulous inspection, shifted impatiently. "What's that thread got to do with anything, Poirot? Looks like it came from the curtain, sure, but it could have snagged any time." Poirot shook his head, his expression enigmatic. "Non, Inspector. In a crime such as this, nothing is accidental. This thread, it is a clue, but its meaning is not yet clear. Perhaps it points to the killer, or perhaps it is a deception." He slipped the thread into his pocket, his mind turning to the curtain itself. He crossed the room, his polished shoes silent on the oak floor, and examined the tier closely. The fabric was thick, its fibers strong, yet the tier was clean in places, as if made with intent rather than in the chaos of a struggle. "This tear," he said, almost to himself, "it is not the result of violence. It is deliberate, a stage prop in this drama." Japp frowned, scratching his chin. "A prop? You're saying someone tore it on purpose to make us think there was a fight?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Exactement. The killer wishes us to see a struggle where there was none. The cyanide, it is swift. Madame Varenne would have collapsed within moments. There was no time for a struggle, no need for violence. Yet the curtain is torn. The cup is broken. Why?" He paused, his little grey cells humming. "To mislead, perhaps, or to conceal something else." He returned to the desk, his attention drawn to a small brass key, half hidden beneath a sketch of a flowing gown. It was unremarkable, save for its presence among Eloise's papers. Poirot lifted it carefully, noting its weight and the faint scratches on its surface, as if it had been used often. "Inspector," he said, holding up the key. "This was found on the desk." Japp nodded. "Aye, one of my men spotted it. Probably. Opens a drawer or a cabinet. We haven't checked yet. Didn't seem urgent." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "In a murder, mon ami, everything is urgent." He surveyed the desk, its drawers neatly closed, and tested the key in the topmost one. It turned with a soft click, revealing a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon. Poirot untied the bundle, his gloved fingers deft. The letters were from various creditors, their tone increasingly sharp, system demanding. One letter from a bank spoke of overdue payments on a substantial loan, with a stern warning of foreclosure if unpaid. Another, from a fabric supplier, demanded immediate settlement of an account. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. Madame Varenne, it seems, was not as prosperous as her reputation suggested, he said, handing the letters to Japp. "This gives our friend Hawthorne a motive, perhaps." Japp scanned the letters, his face darkening. "Blimey, she was in deep. You think Hawthorne knew?" Poirot's expression was unreadable. "A man who invests heavily in a failing enterprise knows more than he admits, Inspector. But let us not leap to conclusions." He closed the drawer, pocketing the key for further study. His gaze returned to the torn curtain, then to the teapot. The sequence of events was becoming clearer in his mind. The tea prepared, left unattended, poisoned, the cup shattered, the curtain torn. But the why and the who remained elusive. He turned to Japp, who was now rifling through a stack of Eloise's sketches. "Inspector, I would like to speak with the staff, those who were here this morning. They may have seen something, however small." Japp nodded, barking an order to a constable. "And the suspects?" he asked. "You want them back here?" Poirot shook his head. "Not yet. Let them simmer in their thoughts. Fear sharpens the memory, and the guilty will betray themselves in time." As Japp organized the interviews, Poirot stood by the window, his eyes tracing the jagged tear in the curtain. The atelier was a puzzle, each clue a piece that did not yet fit. The poisoned cup, the torn curtain, the velvet thread, the hidden key. They were threads in a tapestry, but the pattern was obscured. Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly, seeking the connection. Was the curtain torn to distract, or to hide something more tangible? And the tea? How had the cyanide been administered, and by whom? Clara, André, Hawthorne, each had motive, but motive alone was not enough. The killer had acted with cold precision, and Poirot sensed a mind as calculating as his own. He glanced at Sophie, who was now speaking to a constable, her hands still twisting in her apron. Her role seemed minor, yet her proximity to the tea made her a figure of interest. Poirot made a mental note to question her further, alone, where her nerves might reveal more. For now he returned to the desk, his fingers brushing the velvet runner, now stiff with dried tea. The scene was too perfect, he thought, too staged. The killer had crafted a narrative, but Hercule Poirot would rewrite it with the truth. Chapter 4. The Model's Secret. Hercule Poirot sat in the quiet elegance of his London apartment, the soft glow of a single lamp illuminating the polished surfaces of his furniture. The room, with its meticulous order and symmetrical arrangement, reflected the mind of its occupant, a mind now wholly occupied with the mystery of Madame Heloise Varenne's death. He had invited Mademoiselle Clara Duval for tea, not merely out of courtesy, but to probe the delicate facade of her composure. The atelier's tragedy demanded a closer look at its star model, whose beauty and poise might conceal a darker truth. Clara arrived promptly at 4 o'clock, her movements as graceful as if she were gliding down a catwalk. She wore a tailored navy coat, its simplicity a stark contrast to the extravagant gowns she modelled for Heloise. Her golden hair was pinned neatly, and her blue eyes, though still touched with the redness of grief, held a guarded intensity. Poirot rose to greet her, his small frame exuding an authority that belied his stature. "Mademoiselle Duval," he said, his voice warm yet precise, "you are most kind to join me. Please sit, and let us take tea together." He gestured to a velvet-upholstered chair, its hue a subtle echo of the atelier's fateful curtain. Clara settled into the chair, her posture impeccable, though her fingers betrayed a slight tremor as she accepted a delicate porcelain cup. Poirot poured the tea with care, his movements as deliberate as a ritual, and offered her a plate of scones, their golden crusts fragrant with butter. "I find," he said, his tone conversational, "that a moment of calm can loosen the tongue, where questions alone may tighten it. Tell me, mademoiselle, of your life with Madame Varenne. She was, I understand, more than an employer to you." Clara sipped her tea, her eyes fixed on the cup as if it held answers. "She was everything," she said softly, her French accent lending a melodic quality to her words. "Eloise discovered me in Paris, a nobody in a cafe, sketching dresses I could never afford. She saw something in me, made me her muse. Without her, I'd still be invisible." Her voice trembled, and she set the cup down, her fingers lingering on its handle. Poirot noted the emotion, genuine yet controlled, and leaned forward slightly. "And yet, mademoiselle, even muses may feel the weight of expectation. Was Madame Varenne always kind to her star?" Clara's lips parted, then closed, as if she had caught herself on the edge of a confession. She looked up, her eyes meeting Poirot's with a flicker of defiance. "She was demanding," she admitted. "Eloise wanted perfection. Every seam, every pose had to be flawless. Lately, she said I was losing my spark. She threatened to replace me with Elise, a new girl, younger, hungrier." Her voice grew sharp, and she twisted her hands in her lap. "But I didn't kill her, Monsieur Poirot. I was in the fitting room, trying on her spring collection, when it happened." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his little grey cells at work. "Alone, mademoiselle? In a fitting room, with no one to see you?" Clara's cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. "Yes, alone. The seamstresses were busy, and Heloise didn't like interruptions during her sketching. I heard nothing until Sophie's scream." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. The absence of witnesses was a recurring theme, he noted, as flimsy as the silk veils Eloise so loved. He observed Clara's hands, their nails perfectly manicured, unmarred by any sign of struggle or haste. Yet perfection, he knew, could be a mask. He leaned back, sipping his tea with deliberate calm. You owed Madame Varenne your career, yet she threatened to cast you aside. Such a betrayal. It wounds the heart, does it not? Clara's eyes flashed, and she straightened in her chair. I loved her, she said fiercely. She was hard, yes, but she made me who I am. I'd never harm her. Poirot tilted his head, his gaze piercing. The heart, mademoiselle, is a complex thing. It may love and resent in the same breath. Tell me, did you ever see Monsieur Hawthorne or Monsieur Leclerc near Madame's desk that morning? Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening on the armrest. I saw Monsieur Hawthorne, she said at last. He came to the atelier just before 9, looking agitated. He went to Eloise's office, but I didn't see him leave. I was in the fitting room by then. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And Monsieur Leclerc? Clara shook her head. I didn't see him, but he's always lurking, isn't he? He hated Eloise, called her designs outdated. He was at the atelier yesterday, arguing with her. I heard them from the showroom. Poirot filed away her words, noting the subtle shift in her tone when speaking of Hawthorne. Was it fear, or something else? He set down his cup, his movements precise. One final question, mademoiselle. The velvet curtain in the atelier. Did you notice it before Madame's death? Was it torn? Clara frowned, her brow furrowing. I don't recall. It was always there, heavy and dark. I didn't look closely. Poirot smiled faintly, a smile that revealed nothing. Merci, mademoiselle. You have given me much to consider. As Clara rose to leave, her coat brushing the chair, Poirot's eyes caught a fleeting detail. A single burgundy thread, barely visible, clinging to the hem of her sleeve. It was identical to the thread he had found on Eloise's desk, a match to the torn curtain. He said nothing, allowing her to depart with a murmured farewell. But his mind was alight with possibilities. Had Clara been near the desk after all, despite her claims? Or was the thread a coincidence, carried by the atelier's busy currents? Poirot's little grey cells hummed, weaving connections between the tea, the curtain, and the model's guarded heart. He rose, crossing to his desk, where he placed the thread from Clara's sleeve beside the one from the atelier. They were indistinguishable, their rich hue a silent accusation. Yet Poirot knew better than to leap to conclusions. Clara's beauty and poise were weapons, but were they those of a murderer? Her motive, fear of losing her place, was strong, but her alibi, though unverified, was plausible. The thread, however, was a puzzle piece that did not yet fit. Poirot paced his apartment, his polished shoes silent on the rug, his thoughts as orderly as the room around him. The image of Eloise's atelier returned to him. The shattered cup, the stained runner, the torn curtain. Clara's presence in the fitting room placed her near the scene, but not at the desk. Yet the thread suggested otherwise. Had she lied about her movements, or had the thread found its way to her sleeve by chance? Poirot's mind turned to Hawthorne, whose agitation Clara had noted, and Leclerc, whose rivalry simmered like a hidden flame. Each suspect was a thread in the tapestry, but the pattern remained elusive. He sat once more, pouring himself another cup of tea, its steam curling like a question mark. Clara's secret, he sensed, was not merely her fear of replacement, but something deeper, perhaps a wound she had not yet revealed. Her love for Heloise, she claimed, was profound, yet love could curdle into resentment under pressure. Poirot resolved to watch her closely, to test her story against the others. The thread on her sleeve was a clue, but not a condemnation. Not yet. As the clock chimed 5, Poirot leaned back, his eyes half closed, his little grey cells working tirelessly. The atelier of death held its secrets tightly. But Hercule Poirot was a man who unravelled even the most stubborn knots. Clara Duval, with her porcelain beauty and trembling hands, was a key figure in this drama. But whether as victim, witness, or villain, he would discover in time. Chapter 5. The Rival's Ambition. Hercule Poirot stepped into the bustling studio of Monsieur André Leclerc, a stark contrast to the refined elegance of Heloise Varenne's atelier. The air here was charged with frenetic energy. Sewing machines whirred, assistants darted between tables laden with bold fabrics, and sketches of daring angular designs plastered the walls. The studio, tucked in a narrow street off Bond Street, was a crucible of ambition, its chaos a testament to Leclerc's relentless drive. Poirot, his impeccable suit and polished shoes at odds with the cluttered surroundings, moved with the calm precision of a man who thrived in disorder, only to impose order upon it. His purpose was clear: to probe the heart of André Leclerc, whose rivalry with Heloise might have ignited a murderous spark. André stood at the center of the room, his dark eyes flashing as he barked orders at a young seamstress struggling with a vibrant scarlet fabric. His tailored jacket, cut in his own avant-garde style, accentuated his lean frame, and his slicked-back hair gleamed under the studio's harsh lights. He turned as Poirot approached, his lips curling into a sardonic smile. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his French accent thick with a hint of mockery, "you honor my humble workshop? Come to admire my genius, or to accuse me of something more sinister?" His tone was light, but his eyes were wary, like those of a fencer awaiting an opponent's thrust. Poirot's moustache twitched, a subtle sign of his amusement. "Monsieur Leclerc," he replied, his voice smooth as polished silk. "Genius is a matter for critics, but truth is my domain. I come to discuss Madame Varenne, whose death has cast a shadow over your world as well as hers." He gestured to a nearby chair, its frame draped with a swatch of emerald taffeta. "May we speak privately?" André hesitated, then waved his assistants away with an impatient flick of his hand. The seamstress scurried off, leaving the two men alone amidst the clutter of creativity. They sat, Poirot's small frame perched with meticulous grace, André sprawling with the casual arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. "So," André began, crossing his arms, "you think I poisoned Heloise because she called my designs vulgar? A bit dramatic, non?" Poirot's green eyes gleamed, unyielding. "Dramatic, perhaps, but not impossible. You argued with Madame Varenne the day before her death, did you not? A heated exchange, I'm told, about your respective visions of fashion." André's smirk faltered, but he recovered quickly. We argued. Heloise clung to her outdated elegance, all lace and pearls. She accused me of stealing her ideas, as if my work needed her influence. I told her she was a fossil, and she threw me out. Poirot leaned forward, his hands clasped. "And this argument, it left you bitter?" André shrugged, his nonchalance a studied performance. "Bitter. Number amused, perhaps. Heloise's time was passing. She knew it, and it drove her mad. But I was at my studio yesterday morning, sketching for my autumn line. My assistant Marie can confirm it when she returns from Paris." Poirot noted the absence of this assistant, a recurring convenience in André's narrative. "And this Marie," he said, "she was with you at 9 o'clock, when Madame Varenne drank her fatal tea." André's eyes flickered. "She was in and out, running errands. But I was here, buried in my work." Poirot's gaze swept the studio, landing on a work table strewn with fabric swatches. Among them, a piece of burgundy velvet caught his eye, its texture and hue identical to the torn curtain in Eloise's atelier. He rose, his movements deliberate, and approached the table, lifting the swatch with a gloved hand. "This velvet," he said, holding it to the light. "It is remarkably like that in Madame Varenne's atelier. A curious coincidence, no?" André's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Velvet is common enough, Monsieur Poirot. I use it in my designs, as did Eloise. It means nothing." "Perhaps," Poirot murmured, slipping the swatch into his pocket beside the threads from Clara and the atelier. "But in a murder, monsieur, nothing is without meaning." He returned to his chair, his eyes never leaving André's. "Tell me, what did you know of Madame Varenne's financial troubles, her debts, her over-budget collection? Did these affect you?" André's smirk returned, sharper now. "Her troubles, they were her own making. She spent like an empress, and her investors were fools to indulge her. If she failed, it only proved my point. Her time was over." Poirot's little grey cells hummed. André's disdain was palpable. But was it a mask for deeper motives? A rival's success could be a death knell in the cutthroat world of fashion, and Eloise's influence might have stifled André's rise. Yet his alibi, though shaky, held for now. Poirot shifted his approach. "You visited the atelier yesterday, during your argument. Did you return this morning, perhaps to continue your discussion?" André's eyes narrowed. "No, I had no reason to go back. Eloise was a thorn, but I didn't need to kill her to prove my worth." Poirot tilted his head, his voice soft but probing. "And yet, monsieur, a man of your ambition might see an opportunity in her absence. With Eloise gone, your star could shine brighter." André laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You think I'd risk everything for that? My designs speak for themselves. I don't need poison to win." But his laughter rang hollow, and Poirot noted a fleeting tension in his posture, a crack in his bravado. Rising, Poirot paced the studio, his polished shoes silent on the worn floorboards. He paused by a mannequin draped in one of André's creations, a daring gown of black silk and velvet, its lines bold and unconventional. A single burgundy thread clung to the hem, unnoticed by André's busy assistants. Poirot plucked it carefully, adding it to his growing collection. "The velvet," he said, almost to himself. "It follows me, like a shadow." André watched him, his smirk gone, replaced by a wary curiosity. "You see clues where there are none, Monsieur Poirot," he said. "A thread is just a thread." "Perhaps," Poirot replied, his smile enigmatic. "But a thread, when pulled, may unravel a tapestry of lies." He turned to André, his tone firm. "You say you were here, sketching, yet your assistant is absent, and your rivalry with Madame Varenne was fierce. Tell me, did you see Monsieur Hawthorne or Mademoiselle Duval near her desk that morning?" André leaned back, his eyes calculating. "I wasn't there, but I heard Hawthorne was sniffing around, probably begging for his money back. As for Clara, she's a pretty doll, but Eloise was tiring of her. she'd have been out on the street soon enough. Poirot's eyes gleamed. André's words, laced with malice, revealed more than he intended. His contempt for Clara and Hawthorne suggested a man who thrived on others' failures, but did it extend to murder? The velvet swatch and thread were troubling, linking André to the atelier's scene, yet they were not proof. Poirot needed more, a slip, a contradiction, a glimpse of the truth beneath the designer's polished exterior. He thanked André with a courteous nod, his mind already turning to the next thread in the tapestry. "You have been most illuminating, Monsieur Leclerc," he said. "I shall return, perhaps, when your assistant is present." André's smile was tight. "Do as you like, Poirot. I have nothing to hide." But as Poirot stepped into the crisp London air, he felt the weight of André's words, heavy with defiance, yet thin with certainty. The rival's ambition was a fire, but had it burned hot enough to kill? Back in his apartment, Poirot laid out the threads, Clara's, the atelier's, and now André's, on his desk, their burgundy hues identical under the lamplight. The velvet was a constant, a motif in this deadly drama, but its role remained elusive. André's studio, his rivalry, his unguarded scorn, all pointed to motive, but the opportunity was less clear. The absent assistant, Marie, was a gap in his story, one Poirot intended to fill. For now he sat back, his little grey cells weaving the clues into a pattern, incomplete, but growing clearer. The atelier of death held its secrets, but Hercule Poirot was closing in. Chapter 6. The investor's burden, Hercule Poirot entered the dimly lit confines of the St. James's Club, its oak-panelled walls and leather armchairs exuding an air of quiet wealth and discretion. The clink of glasses and the low murmur of conversation provided a backdrop as subdued as the mood of his quarry, Mr. Reginald Hawthorne. Poirot had chosen this venue deliberately, knowing that a man like Hawthorne, whose world revolved around ledgers and investments, would feel at ease here, perhaps enough to let slip a truth he guarded elsewhere. The death of Madame Eloise Varenne had cast a shadow over her fashion empire, and Hawthorne, as her principal investor, stood at its edge, his fortunes precariously tied to her fate. Hawthorne sat in a corner booth, his broad frame hunched over a glass of brandy, his fingers toying nervously with the gold watch chain that hung from his waistcoat. His grey suit, though costly, was creased, as if he had slept in it, and his lined face bore the strain of a man staring into the abyss of financial ruin. As Poirot approached, Hawthorne looked up, his eyes wary but resigned. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice rough with a northern burr, "I expected you'd come sniffing about sooner or later. Care for a drink?" Poirot declined with a polite wave of his hand, settling into the chair opposite with the precision of a man who never sat carelessly. "Merci, Monsieur Hawthorne, but I prefer to keep my mind clear," Poirot said, his green eyes fixed on the investor. "It is clarity we need, is it not, to unravel the tragedy of Madame Varenne's death? You, as her financier, must feel this loss keenly." Hawthorne's fingers tightened on his glass, and he took a quick sip, the amber liquid catching the lamplight. "Keenly. That's one way to put it," he muttered. "Eloise was a genius, but a costly one. Her death's a disaster. For me, for the business, for everyone." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his little grey cells stirring. "A disaster. Oui, but perhaps not unforeseen. I have learned that Madame Varenne's fashion house was not as prosperous as its reputation suggested. Debts, monsieur, and an over-budget collection. These are burdens you, as her investor, must have known well." Hawthorne's face paled, and he mopped his brow with a monogrammed handkerchief. "You've been poking into her books, have you?" he said, his tone defensive. "Yes, the business was struggling. Eloise spent like she was dressing royalty, and the spring collection was bleeding me dry. I told her we needed to cut back, but she wouldn't listen." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but unrelenting. "And this disagreement, it brought you to her atelier the morning of her death, did it not? You were seen, monsieur, by Mademoiselle Duval, looking, what was the word, agitated." Hawthorne's hand froze on his watch chain, his eyes darting to Poirot's. "Agitated? I was frustrated, that's all. I went to her office at 8:30 to discuss the budget. She was sketching, as usual, ignoring my concerns. I left her alive, Poirot, I swear it. I was in my office across town by 9, going over accounts." Poirot's gaze was steady, like a tailor measuring cloth. "Your office, monsieur, is it far? A man might leave the atelier, return to his desk, and claim he was there all along. None." Hawthorne's cheeks flushed, and he leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "Now, see here, Poirot. I'm no murderer. I had everything to lose if Eloise died. My money was tied up in her name, her designs. Her death leaves me on the brink of ruin." His words were fervent, but Poirot noted the sweat beading at his temple, the slight tremor in his hand. Desperation, he knew, could drive a man to desperate acts. "Ruin," Poirot echoed, his tone thoughtful. "A powerful motive, monsieur. A man facing ruin might act to protect himself, perhaps by eliminating the source of his troubles." Hawthorne's eyes widened, and he slammed his glass down, brandy sloshing over the rim. "That's preposterous. I'd gain nothing by killing her. The debts are still there, and now the business is in chaos. You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot." But his protestations, Poirot observed, were tinged with fear, as if he sensed the noose of suspicion tightening. Poirot shifted his approach, his voice as smooth as the velvet in Eloise's atelier. "Let us speak of the scene, monsieur. The torn curtain in Madame's atelier. Did you notice it when you visited her?" Hawthorne frowned, his brow furrowing. "The curtain? I suppose it was there, same as always. I didn't pay it much mind. Eloise's office was full of her frills and fabrics." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And the tea on her desk. You saw it, perhaps, when you spoke with her." Hawthorne hesitated, his fingers resuming their fidgeting with the watch chain. "There was a tray, yes, a teapot, a cup. I didn't touch it. She was sipping it when I left." Poirot's little grey cells hummed. Hawthorne's presence at the desk, so close to the poisoned tea, was a thread he could not ignore. Yet the man's agitation suggested a burden beyond mere financial loss. Poirot recalled the letters found in Eloise's drawer, their demands for payment, a silent scream of her precarious empire. "You invested heavily in Madame Varenne," he said, "yet you knew her debts were mounting. Did you fear she would drag you into bankruptcy?" Hawthorne's shoulders slumped, and he stared into his glass. "I feared it, yes. I'd sunk my fortune into her name. If she failed, I'd be finished. But murder? I'm no killer, Poirot." Poirot rose, his movements deliberate, and paced the small booth, his polished shoes silent on the carpet. He paused by a side table, where a vase of roses stood, their petals a faint echo of the burgundy velvet that haunted this case. "The mind of a murderer," he said, almost to himself, "isn't always driven by gain, but sometimes by fear. Fear of loss, of disgrace, of ruin. He turned back to Hawthorne, his eyes piercing. "You were in the atelier, near the tea, near the curtain. A man in your position might act swiftly, decisively, to save himself." Hawthorne stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Enough of this," he snapped. "I've told you what I know. I left Eloise alive, and I've got nothing more to say." But as he turned to leave, Poirot's voice stopped him cold. "One moment, monsieur. Your watch chain. It is a fine piece, but there is a thread caught in its links. Burgundy, like the curtain in Madame's atelier." Hawthorne froze, his hand flying to the chain. Sure enough, a single velvet thread clung to the gold, its hue unmistakable. His face drained of colour, and he stammered, I don't know how that got there. I must have brushed against something." Poirot's smile was faint but unyielding. "Perhaps, monsieur, but in a murder, such details are never without purpose." He plucked the thread with his handkerchief, adding it to his collection. Hawthorne's eyes followed the motion, his breath uneven. "You may go for now," Poirot said, his tone courteous but firm. "But know that Hercule Poirot sees all, and the truth will not remain hidden." As Hawthorne hurried out, his steps heavy with unease, Poirot remained in the booth, his thoughts as orderly as the club's polished surfaces. The thread on Hawthorne's chain was another link to the atelier, joining those from Clara and André. Each suspect was tethered to the crime by these delicate strands, but their meaning was still obscured. Hawthorne's desperation was palpable, his financial ruin a motive as compelling as Clara's fear or André's ambition. Yet his claim of innocence, though shaken, held a ring of truth. Or was it the practiced plea of a guilty man? Poirot returned to his apartment, where he laid out the threads on his desk, their burgundy hues glowing under the lamplight. The atelier's curtain, the poisoned tea, the hidden letters, and now Hawthorne's thread. They formed a pattern, but one incomplete. The investor's burden was heavy, but had it driven him to murder? Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly, weaving the clues into a tapestry that was slowly taking shape. He would need to test Hawthorne's story further, perhaps by tracing his movements after leaving the atelier. For now the threads were his guide, and Hercule Poirot followed them with unwavering resolve. Chapter 7. The Thread of Truth. Hercule Poirot returned to the atelier of Madame Eloise Varenne, where the morning's tragedy lingered like a stubborn stain on the opulent surroundings. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the oak floor, and the air held a faint chill, as if the room itself mourned its mistress. The atelier was quieter now, the bustle of police activity reduced to a single constable guarding the door. Poirot's polished shoes clicked softly as he crossed to the mahogany desk, his eyes drawn once more to the scene of the crime. The shattered teacup, its porcelain fragments still scattered, the velvet runner stained with spilled tea, and the heavy burgundy curtain, its jagged tear a silent accusation. His collection of velvet threads, from Clara, André, Hawthorne, and the desk, burned in his pocket, each a clue to the tapestry of deceit he was determined to unravel. Inspector Japp, his notebook tucked under his arm, joined Poirot by the desk, his face etched with the weariness of a long day. "Back again, Poirot," he said, his voice gruff but tinged with respect. "You've got that look in your eye, like you're on to something. Care to share with an old friend?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Patience, mon ami," he replied, his tone smooth as the silk bolts lining the walls. "The truth is like a fine fabric. It must be handled with care, lest it fray. But I assure you, we are close to seeing its pattern." He turned his attention to the curtain, its rich burgundy folds, catching the fading light. Kneeling with a grace that belied his fastidious nature, Poirot examined the tear closely, his gloved fingers tracing its edges. The fabric was thick, its fibers resistant, yet the tear was not the ragged result of a struggle. The cut was too deliberate in places, with clean lines suggesting a blade or scissors, though frayed at the ends to mimic violence. "This tear," he murmured, "is a lie. It was made to deceive, to suggest a scuffle where there was none." The cyanide acted swiftly. Madame Varenne had no time to fight. Japp scratched his chin, peering at the curtain. "You're saying someone staged it? Tore it on purpose to throw us off?" Poirot nodded, rising to his feet. "Précisément. The killer is clever, Inspector, but not clever enough to fool Hercule Poirot." His eyes swept the room, landing on the desk once more. The brass key he had found earlier, now safely in his possession, had unlocked a drawer of secrets. Letters revealing Eloise's debts. But there was more to discover, he sensed, hidden in the atelier's silent corners. He called for Sophie Martin, the assistant who appeared from the workroom, her mousy demeanour unchanged, her hands still twisting in her apron. "Mademoiselle Martin," Poirot said, his voice gentle but commanding. "You were in the atelier this morning, preparing Madame's tea and moving about. Tell me, did you see Monsieur Hawthorne linger near this desk, perhaps longer than necessary?" Sophie's eyes widened, and she hesitated, her fingers tightening. I think so, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling. "He came to see Madame around 8:30. They spoke in her office, but he was near the desk when I brought the tea. He seemed upset, pacing, touching things." Poirot's little grey cells hummed. Hawthorne's presence at the desk, so close to the tea, was a thread pulling tighter. "And Mademoiselle Duval, or Monsieur Leclerc, did you see them near the desk?" Sophie shook her head. "Clara was in the fitting room, I think. I didn't see Monsieur Leclerc that morning, but he was here yesterday, shouting at Madame." Poirot nodded, dismissing her with a kind word, his mind cataloguing her words. Sophie's nervousness was genuine, but her observations placed Hawthorne in a precarious position. He returned to the desk, his fingers brushing the velvet runner, now stiff with dried tea. Among the sketches and fabric swatches, he noticed a small, leather-bound ledger, its edges worn from frequent handling. It had been overlooked by Japp's men, tucked beneath a pile of Eloise's designs. Poirot opened it carefully, his eyes scanning the meticulous entries. The ledger detailed the fashion house's finances, orders, expenses, and, most crucially, debts. Page after page revealed a business teetering on collapse, unpaid suppliers, loans from banks, and a series of withdrawals marked only with the initials R.H., Reginald Hawthorne. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered, his eyes narrowing. The ledger painted a grim picture of Eloise's empire, with Hawthorne's name woven through its decline. One entry, dated a week prior, noted a heated exchange. R.H. demands repayment, threatens to withdraw support. Another, more recent, read simply, R.H. insists on meeting, urgent. Poirot closed the ledger, slipping it into his coat. "This, Inspector," he said, turning to Japp, "is the thread of truth we seek. Monsieur Hawthorne was not merely an investor. He was a man desperate to save his fortune. Japp's eyebrows rose as he took the ledger, flipping through its pages. Blimey, Poirot, this is damning. Hawthorne was in it up to his neck. You think he slipped the cyanide into her tea to cut his losses? Poirot's expression was enigmatic. It is possible, mon ami, but we must not rush to judgment. The ledger confirms his motive, but the curtain, the tea, the threads, they tell a story we must fully understand. He paced the atelier, his mind weaving the clues into a pattern. The torn curtain, he was certain, was a distraction. But from what? And the threads, found on Clara, André, Hawthorne, and the desk, were they coincidence or part of a deliberate design? He paused by a sewing table where a pair of fabric shears gleamed under the light. Their blades were sharp, capable of cutting velvet with precision. Poirot lifted them, testing their weight. These shears, he said, could they have torn the curtain? Japp shrugged. Maybe, but why bother? If you're poisoning someone, why stage a struggle? Poirot's eyes gleamed. To mislead, Inspector. To make us see chaos where there was calculation. The killer wishes us to believe in a violent act, but the truth is colder, more precise. He returned to the curtain, examining its hem once more. A faint mark, almost invisible, caught his eye. A smudge of ink, black and glossy, near the tear. It was out of place in the atelier's pristine order, a detail that whispered of carelessness. Poirot's mind flashed to Hawthorne's nervous hands, his gold watch chain, the thread caught in its links. Had he torn the curtain, perhaps in haste, leaving this mark? Or was it another's hand, guiding Poirot's suspicions toward the investor? He scraped a sample of the ink with his handkerchief, tucking it away for later analysis. Inspector, Poirot said, turning to Japp. I must speak with the delivery boys and seamstresses who were here this morning. Their eyes may have seen what Sophie's did not. Japp nodded, issuing orders to the constable. And Hawthorne? He asked. Shall we bring him in? Poirot shook his head. Not yet. Let him feel the weight of his secrets. But I will visit him again, and soon. He glanced at the curtain, its tear a mocking riddle. The thread of truth is here, mon ami, and it leads us to the killer. We have but to follow it. As Japp organized the interviews, Poirot stood by the desk, his eyes tracing the contours of the crime. The ledger, the ink, the shears, the threads, they were pieces of a puzzle, each fitting into the next. Hawthorne's desperation was a powerful motive, but Clara's fear and André's ambitions remained threads in the same tapestry. The atelier held its secrets tightly, but Poirot's little grey cells were relentless, pulling at each clue until the truth would stand revealed. Chapter 8. The Gathering of Suspects. Hercule Poirot stood in the showroom of Madame Eloise Varenne's atelier, its mirrored walls reflecting the sombre faces of the assembled suspects. The chandeliers above cast a soft glow, their light dancing on the racks of elegant gowns, now silent witnesses to a crime. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the room itself awaited the unravelling of its secrets. Poirot had summoned Clara Duval, André Leclerc, and Reginald Hawthorne, along with Inspector Japp, to this final gathering, determined to weave the threads of evidence into a tapestry of truth. His polished shoes clicked softly on the burgundy carpet as he paced, his small frame commanding the space with an authority born of certainty. Clara sat near a mannequin draped in one of Eloise's final designs, her porcelain beauty marred by a nervous tension, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. André lounged against a mirrored pillar, his dark eyes glinting with defiance, though his usual smirk was absent. Hawthorne, his broad shoulders slumped, occupied a velvet chair, his fingers fidgeting with his gold watch chain, the faint glint of a burgundy thread still caught in its links. Japp stood by the door, his notebook open, his expression a mix of skepticism and trust in Poirot's methods. "Well, Poirot," he said, his voice low, "you've got them all here. Let's hear it. What's the trick?" Poirot raised a hand, his gesture silencing the room. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and measured, "the murder of Madame Heloise Varenne was a crime of precision, cloaked in deception. A teacup poisoned with cyanide, a curtain torn to suggest a struggle, threads of velvet scattered like breadcrumbs. These are the elements of a drama staged to mislead. But I, Hercule Poirot, have seen through the performance, and the truth stands before us." His green eyes swept over the suspects, noting Clara's tightened lips, André's stiffening posture, and Hawthorne's beads of sweat. He approached the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back. "Let us begin with the facts," he said. "Madame Varenne died swiftly, her tea laced with cyanide, a poison that requires no struggle, only opportunity. The torn curtain, with its deliberate cut and frayed edges, was not the result of violence, but a calculated act to confuse. The velvet threads found on each of you and on Madame's desk were meant to point to no one, or perhaps to everyone. But it is the why and the who that we must uncover." He turned to Clara, his gaze gentle but unrelenting. "Mademoiselle Duval, you were Madame's muse, her star, yet she threatened to replace you with a younger model. Your fear of losing your place was a wound to the heart, non? You claimed to be in the fitting room, alone, when the murder occurred, but a velvet thread on your sleeve places you near the desk. Did you lie, mademoiselle, to protect your future?" Clara's eyes widened, her voice sharp with defiance. "I told you, Monsieur Poirot, I was in the fitting room. I loved Heloise. She was my mentor. The thread. It must have caught on me earlier. I didn't touch her tea." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, and turned to André. "Monsieur Leclerc, your rivalry with Madame Varenne was a fire that burned brightly. She called your designs vulgar, an insult to your ambition. You argued with her the day before her death, and a swatch of velvet in your studio, identical to her curtain, suggests a connection. You say you were sketching at the time of the murder, but your assistant was conveniently absent. Did you slip into the atelier, monsieur, to end a rivalry that threatened your rise?" André's eyes flashed, his voice cold. "Absurd, Poirot. I didn't need to kill Heloise to surpass her. My designs will outlive her frills. I wasn't there, and you've no proof otherwise." Finally, Poirot faced Hawthorne, whose face was ashen, his hands trembling on his watch chain. "Monsieur Hawthorne, you invested your fortune in Madame Varenne's empire, only to find it crumbling under debts. The ledger I discovered reveals your demands for repayment, your fear of ruin. You were seen near her desk, agitated, moments before her death. A velvet thread on your watch chain ties you to the curtain, and your alibi, alone in your office, is as fragile as glass. Did you, in desperation, poison her tea to save yourself?" Hawthorne's voice broke, his words tumbling out. "I didn't do it, Poirot. Yes, I was there. I argued with her, but I left her alive. I'm ruined now. Her death has destroyed me." Poirot paced slowly, his little grey cells weaving the clues into a coherent whole. "The truth," he said, "lies in the details." The cyanide was administered in the tea, prepared by Sophie Martin, but left unattended. Any of you could have seized the moment. The curtain's tier, made with shears and frayed to deceive, was a distraction, meant to suggest a struggle that never occurred. But the threads tell a different story. He drew from his pocket the collection of velvet strands, holding them up to the light. These were found on each of you, and on Madame's desk. A coincidence, perhaps, but Poirot does not believe in coincidence. He stopped before the torn curtain, his fingers brushing its edge. "The ink smudge I found here, near the tear, was the final clue. It matches the ink from a pen in Monsieur Hawthorne's office, a pen he used to sign his demands for repayment. You, monsieur, were desperate. Eloise's debts threatened to bankrupt you. You visited her that morning, argued, and saw your chance. You slipped cyanide into her tea, a swift and silent act. Then, to cover your crime, you tore the curtain with shears, fraying it to mimic a struggle. But your haste left the ink smudge, a mark of your guilt." Hawthorne's face crumpled, his shoulders shaking as he sank into his chair. "I couldn't lose everything," he sobbed, his voice barely audible. "Eloise refused to cut costs. She was driving us both to ruin. I didn't mean to kill her, but I had to stop her." The room fell silent, Clara's gasp and Andre's sharp intake of breath the only sounds. Japp stepped forward, his handcuffs ready, but his eyes were on Poirot, filled with grudging admiration. "You've done it again, Poirot," he said. "How do you know it was him?" Poirot's smile was modest, but triumphant. "The little grey cells, mon ami. They see what others overlook. The ink, the threads, the desperation in a man's eyes. The curtain was torn to deceive, but the truth cannot be so easily torn apart." As Japp led Hawthorne away, Clara and Andre exchanged glances, their relief palpable, but tinged with unease. Poirot watched them go, his mind already turning to the next mystery, for the world, he knew, was never short of secrets.